In this video, we will learn how to select the primary offense. We'll also discover how to use your Virginia Crime Code book to determine whether felonies in your sentencing event are actually covered by the Virginia sentencing guidelines. We'll review the 5 rules for selecting your primary offense when there are multiple felonies in the event and use case examples to reinforce those rules. And at the end, give you contact information in case you have questions about scoring Virginia sentencing guidelines. In all cases, you have to determine whether the felonies in your sentencing event are actually covered by Virginia sentencing guidelines. The best way to do that is to refer to your Virginia Crime Code book, your VCC book. If you look in that book and the VCC is bolded, it's covered by the guidelines. In Virginia, most felonies are covered by sentencing guidelines, but there are a few that are not, and those are not bolded in your VCC book. If it's not bolded, it means that offense can never be your primary offense, but may be scored as an additional offense. Once you determine whether the felonies in your event are guidelines offenses or not, then you have to follow the 5 rules for selecting your primary offense. The first rule is you compare the statutory maximum. Whatever has the highest statutory maximum, that's your primary offense. If there's a tie there, then you go to rule number 2, where you compare the scores for the primary offense factor on section C. If there's a tie there, you go to rule number 3, compare the total scores on section C. And if there's a tie with the total scores on section C, you go to rule number 4, select as your primary offense the offense that returns the highest guidelines recommendation. Now, rule number 5 really refers back to 1. You select your offense based on statutory maximum. You look in your VCC book. If the offense with the highest statutory maximum is not bolded, it is not a guidelines offense, and no worksheets are submitted to the court. So let's look at these in a little more detail. Rule number 1, highest statutory maximum. In this example, we have an embezzlement charge with a 20-year max, unlawful injury with a 5-year max. Rule 1 says, compare statutory maximum. Well, the embezzlement has a 20-year max. You look in your VCC book, it is bolded, so you can proceed with completing guidelines on the larceny worksheet with embezzlement as your primary offense and unlawful injury as an additional offense. But what happens if you have a tie with a statutory maximum? Then you have to go to rule number 2. In this example, we have third distribution of a Schedule 1 or 2 drug and robbery of a residence with a gun. Look at the statutory maximum under rule 1. They both have a life maximum. Do not focus on the statutory minimums. They are so different. We always focus on the statutory maximum. And we see that both of these are bolded, and we can compare the scores on section C because we have a tie with the statutory maximum. When we go to section C, we're just going to focus on the 1 factor, the primary offense. And when you compare the scores on section C, you'll see 3 columns. We're going to use the other column because we haven't addressed classifying defendant's prior record. Now, as long as you use the same column to compare your scores, you will get the correct result. So, robbery of a residence with a gun picks up 64 points. Sale, Schedule 1 or 2 drug, third or subsequent, picks up 35 points. So your primary offense is robbery because it picks up more points. The drug offense would be scored as an additional offense on the robbery worksheet. So robbery is your primary offense. The drug offense is an additional offense. And Cecil is here to remind you that when you have a tie with the statutory maximum, you always go to worksheet C. But what happens when you have a tie with the scores for the primary offense? Then you go to rule number 3. In this example, we have 3 counts of obtained money by false pretenses and grand larceny, $5 or more from the person, 1 count. Both of these have a 20-year max, so we don't pay attention to the number of counts at this point. We just focus on the statutory maximum. Rule number 1 doesn't help because we have a tie there. So we go to worksheet C. 3 counts of obtained money by false pretenses picks up 10 points, and 1 count of grand larceny from the person picks up 10 points. So rule 2 doesn't help. So we have to go to rule 3, which means that we have to score out both worksheets. So we're going to do the fraud worksheet first, obtain money by false pretenses. Those 3 counts, as we said, picks up 10 points. The additional offense would be the larceny, the grand larceny from the person. We score out the prior record and we have video and scoring prior record. We get a total for the fraud of 15. We have to compare that to the larceny, so we complete the larceny worksheet. One count of grand larceny from the person picks up 10 points. The additional offenses are the 3 counts of obtained money by false pretenses that picks up 6. We score out the prior record factors, and then we get a total score for larceny of 20. We compare that total score to the score for obtained money by false pretenses, and so the grand larceny of $5 or more becomes your primary offense. Again, anytime you have a tie with the statutory maximum, Cecil's here to remind you that you go to section C. What happens if you have a tie with the total score? Then you go to rule number 4. In this example, we have sell cocaine as an accommodation and burn personal property, both 10-year maximum. So we go to section C, and you see Cecil is here again. Compare the scores for the primary offense. They both pick up 8 points. We score out all the worksheets on section C. We get a total of 12. So we go to rule number 4, what gives us the highest guidelines recommendation. Now, in all cases, you go back to worksheet A, and in some cases, you may not even make it over to section C, but you still go to section C when you're trying to select your primary offense, and there's a tie with the statutory maximum. In this case, we don't make it over to section C. We score out worksheet B for both of these. You look at the guidelines recommendation. One is 3 months to 6 months. The other is 1 day to 6 months. We take the one with the highest guidelines recommendation, and we look at the entire recommendation. In this case, the one with the highest guidelines recommendation would be sell cocaine as an accommodation. So that's your primary offense, and your additional offense is burn personal property. Now let's look at rule number 5. Rule number 5 really goes back to rule number 1. You're looking at the VCCs in your VCC book. And when you look at your VCC, in this example, we have distribute Schedule 1 or 2 drug has a 40-year max. And the other offense is sell cocaine base, 250 grams or more. You'll see that the sell cocaine base is not bolded. It has the highest statutory maximum. So in this example, no worksheets would be completed. But let's say that instead of distributing a Schedule 1 or 2 drug, the offense is actually a second conviction. We have the same other offense of cocaine base distribute 250 grams or more. Both of these are life maximum. Because they're both life maximums, we would go with the guidelines offense. Sell Schedule 1 or 2 drug, second conviction. As long as your guidelines offense has a statutory maximum equal to or greater than the non-guidelines offense, then you'll always do the guidelines offense as your primary, scoring as the additional offense, the non-guidelines offense. So when you're selecting your primary offense, you have to follow the rules. The first one, you compare the statutory maximums. When there's a tie with the statutory maximums, you always go to worksheet C. You compare the scores first for the primary offense factor on section C. If there's a tie there, you compare the scores for the total. And if there's a tie there, then you select as your primary offense the guidelines offense that gives you the highest guidelines recommendation. Rule number 5 is there's a tie with the statutory maximum, you always do the guidelines offense as your primary offense. The only time that you don't do guidelines is when the most serious offense in your sentencing event is not bolded in your VCC book. Then no worksheets are submitted to the court. So we have an exercise, and this exercise can also be found on your exercise sheet that you can download from our website. But what I'd like you to do is, using the rape worksheet and the robbery worksheet, select which one would be your primary offense. Is it robbery of a residence with a firearm, or rape victim age 13 or older? Once you compare the scores on section C, you can text the word primary to 56512, and that will return the correct answer. If you have any questions, staff from the commission is always available to answer your questions. You can give us a call, you can send us a text, and our email addresses are on the screen.